The most expensive military inventions in history were built to defeat armies, destroy fleets, and survive enemy fire. But some met an opponent their designers had barely considered. Wind overturned them. Waves swallowed them. Ice crushed them. Mud trapped them. Dust blinded them. Billions of dollars, years of engineering, and entire military careers disappeared without an enemy firing a single shot. The first disaster began with a warship intended to display the power of a kingdom. In 1625, King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden ordered a new generation of heavily armed vessels. Sweden was fighting for control of the Baltic, and the king wanted a floating fortress larger and more intimidating than anything his rivals possessed. The result was Vasa. Vasa carried 64 guns, including 48 heavy 24-pounder cannons. Its stern rose nearly 60 feet above the water. Hundreds of carved figures covered the hull, painted in red, gold, blue, and green. The ship consumed a significant portion of Sweden's naval resources and required roughly 1,000 oak trees. It also carried too much weight above the waterline. Shipbuilders knew something was wrong. During a stability test, 30 sailors ran from one side of the deck to the other. After only 3 crossings, the test was stopped because Vasa was rolling so violently that observers feared it would capsize beside the dock. The ship sailed anyway. On August 10, 1628, Vasa left Stockholm before a crowd of spectators. It traveled less than 1 mile. A moderate gust pushed the vessel sideways, and water poured through its open lower gun ports. The warship rolled over and sank in approximately 100 feet of water. At least 30 people died. The cannons never fired in battle. Sweden had built a ship powerful enough to challenge an enemy fleet, but not stable enough to survive an ordinary breeze. More than 2 centuries later, American engineers produced another revolutionary warship. The U.S.S. Monitor was designed during the American Civil War. It had an iron hull, a low deck, and a rotating armored turret containing 2 11-inch Dahlgren guns. The federal contract valued the vessel at $275,000, an enormous investment in 1861. Its appearance was so unusual that critics compared it to a cheese box sitting on a raft. On March 9, 1862, Monitor fought the Confederate ironclad Virginia at Hampton Roads. For several hours, the 2 armored ships exchanged fire at close range. Neither vessel could destroy the other, but their battle demonstrated that wooden warships had become obsolete almost overnight. Monitor had survived one of the most important naval engagements in history. The Atlantic Ocean required less time. The ship's deck stood only about 18 inches above calm water. That made Monitor difficult to hit during combat, but dangerously vulnerable in heavy seas. On December 31, 1862, the vessel was being towed past Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, when a storm struck. Waves broke across the low deck and forced water through vents, gun ports, and openings around the turret. Pumps struggled to keep pace. Water reached the engine room. The tow line was cut, and the crew attempted to abandon ship in darkness while waves swept across the deck. Monitor sank before dawn. 16 men went down with it. Enemy cannon fire had failed to penetrate its armor. Seawater simply entered through the openings. Imperial Russia tried a different approach. Instead of building a ship that could resist enemy guns, Russian engineers designed a land vehicle that would roll over trenches, walls, and defensive positions. The machine became known as the Tsar tank. Developed during the First World War, it resembled a gigantic armored tricycle. Its 2 front wheels were nearly 30 feet tall. A much smaller roller supported the rear. The towering design was supposed to cross obstacles that would trap conventional armored vehicles. Tsar Nicholas II reportedly watched a small, working model climb over books placed on the floor. Impressed, he authorized approximately 250,000 rubles for the project. The full-sized machine weighed roughly 60 tons. During trials in August 1915, the front wheels moved across firm ground successfully. Then the small rear roller entered soft soil and sank. The tank's engines could not pull it free. The giant front wheels, designed to conquer trenches, provided no solution because the weight pressing into the rear had immobilized the entire vehicle. Engineers tried to recover it. They failed. The Tsar tank remained at the test site for years before it was cut apart for scrap in 1923. It never reached combat and never encountered a German soldier. Russia's largest wheeled weapon had been defeated by a patch of mud. The United States Navy later placed its hopes in a machine that did not touch the ground at all. The U.S.S. Akron was a rigid airship almost 800 feet long. Commissioned in 1931, it was designed as a flying aircraft carrier. Inside its hull, Akron could carry small fighter and reconnaissance airplanes. A trapeze system lowered the aircraft into the open air and caught them again while the airship remained in flight. Akron cost more than $5 million, not including the aircraft and supporting facilities. It represented one of the most sophisticated military aviation programs of its time. The concept promised enormous range. The airship could search thousands of square miles of ocean while its smaller airplanes flew ahead to locate enemy fleets. The atmosphere had other plans. On April 3, 1933, Akron flew into severe weather off the coast of New Jersey. Powerful winds pushed the airship through darkness and rain. The crew had limited information about its altitude over the ocean. A strong downdraft forced the tail downward, and the lower fin struck the water. The enormous ship rapidly broke apart. 73 of the 76 people aboard died. The absence of life jackets and limited rescue equipment increased the death toll, but the immediate cause was brutally simple. A machine built to patrol the sky had been pushed into the sea by turbulent air. Akron never served in combat. Its deadliest adversary was weather. During the Second World War, Britain considered building an aircraft carrier from nature itself. German submarines were sinking Allied ships in the middle of the Atlantic, beyond the effective reach of many land-based aircraft. Conventional aircraft carriers required steel, and steel was needed for tanks, guns, ships, and factories. British inventor Geoffrey Pike proposed a different material, ice. Ordinary ice was too brittle, but researchers discovered that mixing water with wood pulp created a substance called picrete. It was stronger than normal ice, resisted bullets, and melted slowly. Winston Churchill supported further investigation. Project Habakkuk envisioned a floating airbase approximately 2,000 feet long, with walls up to 40 feet thick. The structure might have displaced more than 2 million tons and carried as many as 150 aircraft. It was described as practically unsinkable. The problem was keeping it frozen. Heat from engines, machinery, crew quarters, and aircraft operations would slowly deform the structure. The enormous hull required insulation, ventilation, miles of refrigeration pipes, electrical generators, and constant temperature control. Building the refrigeration system required vast quantities of the same metal the project was intended to save. A prototype was constructed on Patricia Lake in Alberta, Canada. It weighed roughly 1,000 tons and was kept frozen by a small refrigeration system. The test proved that picrete worked. It also demonstrated how difficult a full-sized vessel would be to build, move, repair, and maintain. Projected costs climbed. Longer-range aircraft became available. Escort carriers began closing the Atlantic air gap. By the end of 1943, military planners concluded that Habakkuk demanded too many resources for a problem already being solved by conventional technology. The Canadian prototype was abandoned. It took 3 summers to melt. The proposed supercarrier had been designed around ice, then defeated by the energy required to stop ice from behaving naturally. The Cold War pushed military engineers into an even less forgiving environment. In 1959, the United States Army began constructing Camp Century beneath the Greenland ice sheet. Publicly, the facility was presented as a scientific research station and an experiment in Arctic construction. Its deeper purpose was connected to Project Iceworm. The proposed system would place hundreds of nuclear missiles beneath Greenland. Thousands of miles of tunnels could allow the weapons to move between launch sites, making it difficult for the Soviet Union to identify and destroy them. Camp Century served as a practical test. Engineers cut long trenches into the ice and covered them with steel arches and snow. The base included laboratories, sleeping quarters, a kitchen, a communications center, a medical facility, and a portable nuclear reactor. 21 tunnels extended for nearly 2 miles. It appeared to prove that a hidden city could operate inside a glacier. But a glacier is not solid ground. The ice moved continuously under its own weight. Walls pushed inward. Ceilings sagged. Support structures bent. Tunnels that appeared stable during construction slowly narrowed as thousands of tons of ice shifted around them. Workers repeatedly trimmed and reinforced the passages. Maintaining a relatively small base became increasingly difficult. A missile network thousands of miles long would have required constant excavation merely to stop nature from crushing it. The nuclear reactor was removed in 1964. Camp Century was abandoned in 1967. The proposed missile system never became operational. American planners had imagined hiding weapons inside an ice sheet. The ice refused to hold still. Nature disrupted another American military operation in 1980, this time in the Iranian desert, after Iranian militants seized the United States Embassy in Tehran. American commanders developed Operation Eagle Claw to rescue 52 hostages. The mission required aircraft from different military branches to fly hundreds of miles at night, land at a remote desert location, refuel, and continue toward Tehran. 8 Navy RH-53 helicopters launched from the aircraft carrier U.S.S. Nimitz. The plan required at least 6 to continue. Then the formation encountered suspended walls of desert dust known as hay boobs. Ziffin collapsed. Fine particles entered equipment and filled the air inside the helicopters. Pilots became disoriented. Electrical and hydraulic problems developed. One helicopter turned back after receiving a warning in its rotor system. Another lost critical instruments. A third arrived with a hydraulic failure. Only 5 usable helicopters reached the refueling site, below the minimum required. The mission was canceled. While the force prepared to withdraw, a helicopter collided with a parked C-130 transport aircraft. Fuel ignited. 8 American servicemen died, and multiple aircraft were abandoned in the desert. The failure involved planning, coordination, equipment, and command decisions. The dust storm was not the only cause. It was the environmental pressure that exposed every weakness at once. Decades later, the United States deployed a far more modern system designed to watch the sky. The Joint Land Attack Cruise Missile Defense Elevated Netted Sensor System was known as J.L.E.N.S. It used enormous tethered aerostats carrying radar equipment thousands of feet above the ground. From that altitude, the sensors could detect aircraft, vehicles, ships, and low-flying cruise missiles across a wide area. Development and testing consumed approximately $2.7 billion. In October 2015, one of the aerostats was operating from Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Strong winds placed heavy stress on its tether. The line broke. The 240-foot balloon drifted north into Pennsylvania, dragging thousands of feet of cable behind it. The cable struck electrical lines and caused widespread power outages. Fighter aircraft were launched to monitor the runaway radar platform. After traveling for hours, the aerostat descended into trees more than 100 miles from its base. It had been designed to detect hostile objects approaching through American airspace. The wind turned it into one. These machines came from different centuries, countries, and military doctrines, but they shared the same assumption. Their designers treated nature as a fixed background rather than an active force. Vasa's builders added guns without respecting stability. Monitor's armor could stop shells but not waves. The Tsar tank could cross trenches but not soft soil. Akron could carry airplanes but could not escape a downdraft. Habakkuk depended on keeping an artificial iceberg permanently frozen. Project Iceworm treated a glacier like bedrock. Operation Eagle Claw depended on machines and crews performing perfectly inside airborne dust. J.L.E.N.S trusted a tether to restrain an aircraft during violent wind. None of these systems were entirely foolish. Some introduced technologies that influenced later designs. Monitor transformed naval warfare. Camp Century produced scientific data that researchers still study. Pykrete remains an extraordinary engineering material, but invention does not negotiate with physics. Weapons are usually judged by range, armor, speed, firepower, and cost. Nature measures something else: balance, pressure, temperature, friction, visibility. Weight armies can study an enemy's tactics. Intelligence officers can intercept communications. Generals can change plans when opposing forces move. Wind issues no warning, ice accepts no orders, and mud does not care how much the machine cost.